Please join me in welcoming Ann Carlson.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the introduction. But I thought it might be appropriate in this setting to also introduce you to my two dogs more specifically. Tuco is the little black lab mix, and Timber is the big Great Dane. And I'll be talking a little bit about them later on as well. But they sit behind everything that we do, and they are always our first taste testers. So today, I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm going to be doing 3 sessions back to back. The first session, the one that we're in right now, is really an overview of insect protein. How did this start? What is sort of the history of use? And then in the next hour, I'll go into a deep dive on nutrition, followed by a deep dive on sustainability. And they're very meaty topics. So I'll give you a preview of it during this session, but we're going to go really deep when we get into the nutrition, and it's a lot of fun. So, you know, eating insects has been around forever, but it recently gained a lot of interest because there was a UN study that was done that said that insects could be the answer to world hunger. It was led by Professor Arnold van Huis, and first what they looked at is they said, well, let's look at what's going to happen in the world. And they're projecting forward what the world's population is going to be. The projection at that time is that it would be over 9 billion people by the time we got to 2050. Now they're saying it could be over 10 billion people by the time we get to 2050. And that's problematic. We don't have enough food to feed everybody, let alone our pets. So edible insects was something that Dr. van Huis dove into, and there were lots of reasons why this was a protein source, and actually a source of nutrition that was very exciting. The main reasons why, first, the nutritional value. It's a complete protein with all of the essential amino acids that a person needs, also that a dog needs, and that a cat needs. It's also, though, got fiber, vitamins, minerals. The list kind of goes on and on. In many ways, it's considered a superfood. But it's also highly sustainable. So less land, less water, almost no greenhouse gases to grow these little insects. And the other thing that made it really exciting was accessibility. So insects are found everywhere, and it's relatively easy to grow them if you know what you're doing. It also led to economic opportunity. So for folks who are living in third world countries, it is, somebody back there, it is a way for them to feed their family and oftentimes to make a living as well. There are a lot of people that are foraging for insects, but what it's evolving into is more farming for insects. So I said before that we've been eating insects for years and years. Well, it actually dates back to prehistoric times. There's evidence of insect consumption found in the remains of people from the Stone Age. And I think this is very interesting. The women play a key role. So if you think hunter-gatherer, the men were out, generally speaking, hunting, and the women were gathering food. Well, one of the food sources that they were gathering was insects. And what makes it such a great thing to gather is that there's an abundance, it's low risk, and it's a fantastic protein source. So think of it as a reliable food source for these people. The mothers would use it to supplement because oftentimes there were long stretches where they weren't able to catch any kind of big game. So this was a way to feed the family. There also is some research that shows that the fat in the insects is likely one of the reasons why the human brain was able to develop the way it did, because we needed a fat source for that brain to develop. And I'm talking back to primates, all the way to humans. So this is a fantastic fat source, and you'll see that as we get into the details of the nutrition. So today, there are over 2 billion people that have insects as part of their normal diet. There's over 2,000 different types of insects that have been identified as edible, safe. There's probably a heck of a lot more, but those are the ones that are named and have been tested. The dogs and cats play a role here too. In the wild, they are eating insects. Dogs are hunting and foraging. Cats, when there isn't, when they're feral, up to 60% of their diet is insects. It depends on the situation where they are, but this was a study that was done in Australia, and they were doing it because they were worried about what were the wild cats killing, and when they examined the contents of the stomach, they found that a lot of it was insects. So there are a ton of different types of edible insects. We've established that. But there are some that are the most common. Things like crickets, grasshoppers, mealworms. In other places, you're going to see ants, termites, the beetle larvae, silkworms. Silkworms is considered a delicacy in certain parts of the world. The practice of eating insects has a name. It's called entomophagy. And there's many different ways that they're cooked. If you travel the world, you're going to see them roasted, fried, boiled, steamed. But in the US, what you mostly will see is that they've been dried and ground into a protein powder that gets included in other products. In fact, I've got some samples, they're there, down there, that are going to be passed around, and you can open it up and actually take a sniff. And if you look at the bottom of the jar, it'll tell you which type of insect you're smelling and looking at.
Can we taste it?
Yes, you can. I'd love to hear what you think if you taste it. From a USDA perspective, approval for human consumption has been around for quite a while, and it's considered grass, generally recognized as safe for humans. The key criteria is that they've been raised for human consumption. So that means that they were raised in a controlled environment. And that study that I talked about at the beginning, 2013, it really raised awareness of this, and it launched a ton of products. There's products that are just protein powder that you can add into your smoothie, but there's cookies and chips and bars, a variety of different things if you're so inclined and want to add it into your own diet. Now, fun fact about this, the early adopters were bodybuilders. And bodybuilders are interesting because they really dive into the nutrition. It's packed with protein. It has all of those essential amino acids that I talked about, but then it's rich in all of these vitamins, and even the fat profile is terrific. You'll see it's got a terrific complement of omegas. And then it's also gluten-free, dairy-free, paleo-friendly. But I think one of the main reasons why the bodybuilders really like it is they don't get bloat. And so, if you've ever watched a bodybuilder, they're all about that lean muscle. And this is able to accomplish that because it also has fiber. So it's feeding the good bacteria in their gut. So I'm going to have a couple of new words: entomophagy, eating insects. There's also ento-vegans. Ento-vegans are people who eat exclusively a plant-based diet, except that they add in insects. So this guy that we're looking at here, Josh Galt, He's the one that coined the term ento-vegan, and it's since been pretty widely adopted. Okay, so I am going to now segue a little bit more into the insects themselves. And I'm starting pretty high level. So looking at life, we break it down into kingdoms. And if we're in the US, we break it down into 6 kingdoms. If we're somewhere else in the world, it's likely 5 kingdoms. These 2 at the top get combined often. But, you know, everybody's familiar with this. Plants, mushrooms, and then animals. Well, where do the insects fit? They are an animal. They're a little tiny animal, but they are considered an animal. And I think that's really important. And it kind of supports why you're going to see this great nutrient profile that you would see in other meat sources. The ones that we tend to focus on are the ones that are getting farmed and becoming professionally farmed. Oops, wrong button. It's the black soldier fly larva, the crickets, and there's 2 key types, and then the mealworm. One of the interesting things is that they are extremely similar to what we're seeing in this class over here, Crustacea, the shrimp. In fact, a lot of times people will say that the cricket is a land shrimp. It's got the similar exoskeleton, and they actually both have glucosamine in them. So insects, love fun facts. There's 1 million named species of insects worldwide, but the scientists think that it's way larger than that. We just haven't gotten to all of them yet. They're estimating 1.5 million of beetles alone. And 5.5 is one of the estimates I've seen. I've seen even higher. It's over half of all known living organisms. And I love this one. The total weight of the insects is 70 times that of all humans. And then this is astounding. A conservative estimate, 20 quadrillion ants worldwide. I was like, how many O's is that? It's crazy. So insects are really important when you come right down to it. They are what makes an ecosystem function: pollinators, decomposers. They're also predators. In food and agriculture, they pollinate, yes, but they also help control the pests. So you've probably seen ladybugs eating aphids in your garden. From a human health perspective, some of the insects are used in traditional medicine. There's also cultural significance. And when you come right down to it, biodiversity depends on insects. Insects are in almost every ecosystem, and they're at the bottom of the ecosystem. Without them, everything can collapse. So as I take you through this, I am going to focus mostly on crickets, BSFL, which is black soldier fly larva, also known as grubs, and mealworm. And those are the ones that are getting farmed in North America. The 2 key ones that have been approved by AFCO now are crickets and BSFL. It's approved for dogs. Mealworm is under review. And cats, everybody wants to know about cats. Cats are in process with all 3 of those insect types. But you know, these are not the only types of insects that are getting farmed. It's just the ones that are specifically making their way into North America. In other countries, you'll see grasshoppers, locusts. It goes on and on. I talked about that silkworm as a delicacy. That's a big one as well. Oh, also, there's a little bit of entomology humor in here. So, thinking about the crickets and the black soldier fly larva, or grubs, they're actually very different types of insects. The crickets look like a cricket from the day that they're born, and they just get bigger and all the way up to the point where they are, likely to be consumed. On the flip side, the black soldier fly larva, and actually mealworms as well, they have these immature forms that are called larvae, and it's very different from what they look like as an adult. And at the larval stage, it's all about growth, and they grow really, really fast. And they actually shed off their exoskeleton as they go, as they're getting bigger and bigger. And that actually goes into their manure, which I will talk about later, and that's a significant point. At the adult stage, when in this case it's a fly, the black soldier fly larva, they have very little time in that stage, and it's all about finding a mate, mating, laying eggs. That's it. And they better do it pretty quick because they're not going to last very long. So let's dive into each of these two insects. The crickets first. Crickets are the easiest insect for people to wrap their heads around. Most people, if you ask them if they've tried an insect, they'll say, yes, I tried a cricket somewhere. In fact, show of hands, who in the room has tried? That's a lot, yeah. So what we call them is the gateway bug. And the funny thing is once you've tried one insect, it makes the next one a heck of a lot easier. I have to admit, even me, I'm so into this. I closed my eyes the first time I did it. I just popped it in my mouth with my eyes shut, and then I was like, okay, I can do this. For the most part, when you see crickets, you'll see it like this form here, dried, roasted, and then ground. And the entire cricket is used. I had a funny thing the other day where somebody sent me a question about, well, why are you using crickets? It's so hard to extract the meat from them. They thought we were like butchering a cricket and taking it apart and pulling the meat out. No. The whole insect is dried and then ground. Okay, so I've got a lot of fun facts about crickets because I think they're cool. First of all, they've got these amazing legs, and that's obvious when you look at them. But did you know that they can jump 30 times their body length? It's pretty far, over 3 feet. They're also excellent climbers. They chirp by rubbing their wings together, not their legs. Everybody thinks it's the legs, but nope, it's the wings. And one wing has a scraper, the other one's got a harp, and they actually have an amplification system as well that's built in. They chirp in these short bursts, and they do that because it takes a lot of energy to chirp. And they do it only at the end of their life when they're looking for a mate. They're either calling to attract the female, or it's a courtship thing, and then the males and the females are both chirping at each other. This one I love. Did you know you can tell the temperature by counting crickets' chirps? Crickets are cold-blooded, so as it gets colder outside, their body slows down, so they chirp slower. So if you count the number of chirps in 14 seconds and add it to 40, you have an approximation of what the temperature is outside. And actually, the calculation, if you go by, it's called Dolbear's law. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that, but this is a pretty good proxy. But just another fun fact is it's called Dolbear's law, but actually, and Dolbear is a man, a woman wrote an article identifying this 16 years before Dolbear's law was adopted. And her name, for the record, is, and I can never remember, Margaret Brooks. So we should really be calling it Brooks' law. The other thing about crickets is they've got amazing hearing, but it's not on their head, it's on their legs. You can actually see these little tiny holes right here. There's the sensors. They call it a tympanal organ. And they are really, really sensitive. So you know when you're out and you're walking and you hear a cricket and you want to go try to see it, and as you're walking towards it, it stops chirping, and then you stay still, and then it starts chirping again, you walk toward it, and it stops? That's because of this. They have this amazing hearing, and it really saves them from getting eaten. I love this. A group of crickets is called an orchestra. And the reason they're called an orchestra is because music is essential for the species' survival. So, okay, so that's enough of my fun cricket facts. BSFL, black soldier fly larvae, also called grubs. The BSFL has a little bit different history. So with the crickets, they started farming it for two purposes, reptiles and humans. And since then, it's starting to go into the pet world. BSFL, they actually started farming it for fish, chicken, with the intention to take it to swine and other agriculture, or animal agriculture. The black soldier fly that we're generally working with comes in two forms. One, it is a meal, and you're going to see it going through. It's the darkest of the meals. It's actually defatted because it has so much fat in it. They pull out fat, and that's what we're using when we're cooking with it. The BSFL oil, it actually reminds me of coconut oil. You know how coconut oil gets solid until the heat rises? This oil is just like that, and it has many of the same properties, which is really interesting. It has lauric acid, which is a really important component. It is helpful for mental acuity. So, truth be told, I had a hard time finding really fun facts about flies. This one I thought was cool. I don't know that it's super fun, but they belong to this order called Diptera, and that means that they only have 2 wings. Most other insects have 4 wings or more. And what happened in evolution, their hind wings evolved into these little sensory organs called halteres that allow them to move around and do kind of aerial acrobatics. But it is one of the largest orders of insects with over 150,000 species that have been identified so far. This one I thought was cool. The largest terrestrial animal in Antarctica is a fly. And it's called the Antarctic midge. And when it lays its eggs, you can see this like little gel around it. That is essentially like antifreeze. And they live in that gel for about 2 years before they hatch. They're basically waiting out the weather for an appropriate time to come out and then mate and lay eggs again. This one is also kind of cool. The adult black soldier fly doesn't have a mouth. So when it gets to that stage where it becomes a fly, remember how I said its purpose is to mate and lay eggs? It really is only that. It has to do it quickly because it's not going to eat once it's at that stage. So its lifespan is only a couple of days. The nice thing about that is that if it gets loose, it's not going to bite anybody. It's really not going to cause a lot of problems. So now let's talk about our pets. What makes insect protein interesting for our pets? Well, mostly it's about the protein. And when you look at it, these little insects are packed with protein. But they also have great fat, fiber, minerals, vitamins. It's a novel protein, which makes it super interesting if you've got dogs with allergies. But it's also sustainable. And why does that matter? Well, our pets eat a lot of protein. In fact, a UCLA study showed that our dogs and cats are responsible for 25 to 30% of the environmental impact of meat consumption in the US. That's a big number. The nutrition side, though, is super exciting as well. When you think of it, most of the time everybody thinks of it as a protein replacement. And yes, absolutely it is that. You can think of it as meat, only better. From a protein perspective, it's a complete protein with all of the essential amino acids. It meets or exceeds the levels that AHVMA has specified for dogs and cats. And from a digestibility perspective, it scores over 86 in digestibility feeding trials, and that makes it highly digestible for the dogs. So it is a fantastic replacement, novel protein, alternative protein, whatever you want to call it. But then it goes beyond. It has fiber, prebiotic. And these are studies that I'm going to walk you through in the nutrition session. Lauric acid for brain health, hypoallergenic, and studies confirming it's not just a novel protein, it actually helps dogs that have allergies. Joint health and arthritis, immune response, antimicrobial peptides, pretty cool. Breath and dental health. It's an antioxidant, has calming. And then finally, of course, the sustainable and humane. So let's talk a little bit more about sustainability. When I talk about sustainability with the insects, it's a pretty rich subject. But I think the most important thing to realize is that it uses less land, less water, and generates fewer greenhouse gases. Those are kind of like the three to remember if you remember anything. There's so many reasons why that is, though. That they've got a high feed conversion ratio, short lifespan, you're raising multiple generations throughout the year. It all makes sense when you start to look at it. The interesting thing is when you're raising them, you're using the entire insect, so there's no waste there. It gets ground up into that powder that you saw. But even the frass is used. And you can think of frass as the insect equivalent of manure. It's basically everything that's left once the insects are harvested. So it includes whatever's left in the bedding, but also the manure, the little bits of exoskeleton that have come off when they molted as they were getting bigger. And it is a fantastic fertilizer. One of the things that I love to point out is that when you're using this fertilizer, the plants detect the presence of the exoskeletons, and they think that there's going to be an insect attack, so they prepare for defense. And what that means is their stalks get thicker, they have more flowers, they have more fruit, so basically it's making them stronger. The other thing I'll note is the humane treatment. The insects are a naturally swarming species, so they actually prefer to live together in groups. That's what they would choose to do in the wild. And so when you're raising them, you can raise them in dark spaces that are somewhat cramped. It seems like it would be inhumane, but for them, they are flourishing. And for the crickets, this is a kind of an interesting one. The crickets are pretty active compared to the other insect types. So if you're looking at like the BSFL, they're not moving around a lot. They're basically eating. But the crickets, they do move around a bit. But what they built for them are these things that they call cricket condos. And so the crickets are kind of free range within the barn, within these cricket condo areas. There's watering stations, there's feed stations, but within it they're able to move around, visit their friends, do their thing. Most of the time they spend, though, low in the dark. That's what they like. Okay, a lot of questions about what does it taste like. I get that all the time, and hopefully the crickets, they're making their way around the room. You guys getting a smell of it? The crickets, the way that they describe it, generally speaking, is a mild, nutty, earthy flavor. For me, the first time I tried it, the thing that came to mind was sunflower seeds. But everybody thinks something different. Sometimes somebody will open it and go, oh, it smells like chocolate. And I'm like, okay. Not what I would have said, but you know. The black soldier fly, that's the one I actually do think it has like a cocoa kind of smell, almost coffee. You guys are just smelling it now. What did you guys think it smelled like? Chocolate. Yeah, it's weird. But you know, if you read the literature, they'll say it smells like potatoes when it's cooking, nutty, meaty, and the texture is soft meat if you're eating them whole. I've only eaten them whole once, and the one I ate, they pulled it out because it tasted like cheese, and it actually did. It was pretty interesting. And then as far as acceptance testing for both dogs and cats, it's been positive, absolutely positive. Now, you know that my company is Jiminy, so we make dog food and treats out of both black soldier fly and crickets. When we first got started, we always laughed because the stores that we were working with would come back to us and say, I need more of that cricket crack. And that's because the dogs would go so crazy for the taste of it. So yeah, it tastes good. So how's it produced? Well, back in the day when we first got started, I started this company in 2016. This was our biggest cricket farm, and it was an old chicken farm that got converted to be a cricket farm. Now, this is one of the new facilities that just got built, and you can see it's getting more and more professional and bigger. They are growing to be very large facilities, which is great because as we grow, they're growing with us. What it looks like inside, there's a lot of automation and a ton of AI. They're using artificial intelligence to measure what's going on, to make sure that the temperature is right, the humidity is right, everything is right for the insects. And the newest farms that are getting put in place are really so cool because they really thought a lot about where they're placing them. So they're putting them in places where they can pull a feedstock right off of another company. So you know, whether it's sometimes it's a feed house, and anything that they can't use pulls off and gets fed to the insects, and they're pulling steam from another facility in order to run the facility and heat it. So everything, it's kind of amazing. They're getting to a point where their carbon footprint is almost nothing. Well, it depends. There's a lot at this point. Black soldier fly, there's EnviroFlight, InnovaFeed, Protix, just a bunch of different entrants. And some of them are actually have been acquired by bigger companies like Darling and ADM. And then on the cricket front, it's Entimo, Aspire. Mealworm is coming. And there's a few different companies that are doing that as well. It's more prevalent though in Europe at this point. So we're seeing a huge amount of activity, and quite frankly, a huge amount of funding that's going into the insect farms.
Is there one area of the country that seems to be doing this more than others?
Well, we do all North American sourced, and as it turns out, it's the middle of the country, but it's also Canada. So Canada got on board pretty early on, and the government put subsidies for some of these farms to help them get started. So we've got 2 cricket farms that are sizable and at least 2 black soldier fly farms up in Canada, sort of around Toronto, Ontario, that kind of. And then in the middle of the country, it's like Kansas. So, that's where Kentucky. Actually, most of our black soldier fly come from Kentucky. And what's exciting about it is that they are able to use spent grains and stillage from a bourbon manufacturer. And they're very happy bugs. Yeah. But they're able to feed them a pre-consumer byproduct. And the pre-consumer byproduct's okay because the guaranteed analysis on it, and you're able to combine it together with the right vitamins and minerals to have a feed that is appropriate for the insects. Sure.
So, the earlier lectures, it was brought up how prevalent glycolates are in our whole environment and body, and that a lot of it is coming actually from food.
Mm-hmm.
So how much does the composition of the insect change based on what they're eating? And are we getting has anybody looked at how many glycolates the insects get?
That's a great question. Oh, I'm sorry. It's about the fertilizer that's basically glyphosate. It's permeating through the food industry. The insects, I've asked for testing to be done on them now to see if we're seeing it in the insects. There's likely trace amounts because there's likely trace amounts in pretty much everything at this point. The interesting thing, though, is that the feed source is very controlled for the insects. So it's tested on the way in. The black soldier fly larvae, they can eat the pre-consumer byproducts, and in most cases that's what they're doing because it makes it that much more sustainable. For the crickets, it is usually a feed mixture that is similar to what you would see in chickens, so like an alfalfa base with vitamins and minerals that are added for the crickets specifically. I think somebody's raising their hand back there.
Yeah, it's a similar line of question. Processed meat with heat we generate glycation end products that turn into dog food, maybe even higher. Have you looked at the advanced glycation end products
I couldn't hear all of it, but I think you're asking about the kill step and whether or not there is testing to make sure. No, okay.
Yeah, let me talk louder. I just have trouble with that right now. Advanced glycation end products are produced by heating protein, fat, and starch. Insects contain all those things, so if you bake them and grind them, find chemical necessity to generate advanced glycation end products. When you put them in a kibble, you generate even more. Have you looked at the advanced glycation end product content of the baked meal?
I think I'm going to have to take a follow-up on that because yeah. Yeah. Everything, I mean, the protocols that you see in meat production are here within the insect environment. So, the same kind of testing, the same kind of processing steps that are required. All of that's being put in place. And actually, I think, yeah, here. One of the things that's really nice about the insects is because it's indoor production, you've got full environmental and quality control on what's going on in that plant. And one of the other things that they've seen is that the insects really are free of the common pathogens that you see, so E. coli, staph, and listeria. And it really, I mean, when it comes down to it, it's really just a different kind of poop. And the other thing that I think is interesting is to see that how much this industry is evolving. There are a lot of organizations that have sprung up. NACIA, which I'm on the board for, is the North American Coalition for Insect Agriculture, setting standards for the industry, so sort of helping that industry move forward. I think they call it SEAF, Center for Environmental Sustainability through insect farming. What's happening there is studies. This is a group of universities that have come together, and they're doing all sorts of different studies to dive into all the things that I was talking about earlier and then beyond. They're looking at animal husbandry, they're looking at the different immunity, brain health, all those things that I was talking about. The other thing, there is a group that gets together every year. They call it Insects to Feed the World. And I was lucky enough to get to go to it when it was in Quebec City. And it's actually quite fascinating. They bring in an insect chef, and you get to try, you don't have to, but you get to try a lot of different insects if you'd like. AFCO. So insects are quickly making their way through the AFCO approval process. BSFL is, the meal in particular, is already through fish, poultry, swine, dog. The oil, similar, the fish, the swine, the dog. Cat, on all of these, still in process. You'll note, though, that crickets, it's really just for dogs at this point. Cat is in process, and that kind of stems back to its origins, where it was being used for reptiles and then also for humans. So a lot of the effort was placed against human consumption rather than animal consumption. Okay, so coming sort of full circle, I started the conversation talking about the study that the UN study that said insects could be the answer to world hunger. Professor Arnold van House was the author, and I have to admit I have sort of an intellectual crush on him. And I was lucky enough to actually meet him, and this is a picture of me with him in Quebec City. It was very cool, quite a moment. So that's sort of the overview that I wanted to give. I'm going to get into details on nutrition next, and then sustainability.